only thing we have to fear is
in war.
fear itself.
There is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Thomas Jefferson said, "The Constitution of most of our states and of the United States assert that all power is inherent in the people, that they may exercise it by themselves, that it is their right and duty to be at all times armed, that they are entitled to freedom of person, freedom of religion, freedom of property, and freedom of press."
Welcome to the intersection of faith and politics. This is WallBuilders Live. Thanks for joining us today. It's Foundations of Freedom Thursday. That's our chance to dive into the foundations of our nation. And we love going in a direction that you want us to go in, so we appreciate your questions that you send in. Send them to radio@wallbuilders.com. I'm Rick Green here with David Barton. David, we've got a lot of great questions to cover today.
Yeah, this is always fun, and it'll be interesting to see where we go because we usually end up in a lot of different directions, but that's great.
All right, well, our first one is going to be about conscientious objection. It's from Wilbur Ince in Round Rock, Texas. He said, how about conscientious objection in the history of the U.S., in terms of the way our government and our Constitution and our law is set up? The U.S. has always been favorable towards conscientious objectors, and God has blessed the U.S. because of it, or maybe in spite of the U.S. law. What, David, is your opinion or your comments on this? Do you believe that this law that is favorable to conscientious objectors should continue? Love the program, Will.
Well, the answer to that is if you believe in the founding principles of the country, and, of course, they're set forth in the Declaration, 6 principles, 155 words. Every one of those principles is then enshrined in the Constitution, so the Declaration gives us our blueprint. The Constitution fleshes it out. The Declaration is the skeleton, and the Constitution's the body. So when you look at that, the number one thing is we say there is a God. Then we say God gives a certain set of guaranteed rights to man that don't come from government, they come from him, inalienable rights. Number 3, government exists to protect those rights. The Founding Fathers then went through and identified that we've been able to find about 24 rights that they called natural rights or rights that came from God to man, etc. And one of those rights is the rights of conscience. It is the right to think and believe according to the way that you believe God wants you to think and believe. You're not answerable to the government for that. You answer to God for that. If you think wrong, God will deal with you. If you believe wrong, God will deal with you. But he's the one who deals with you. So government can't tell you how to think or believe. Now, they can tell you how to act, but they can't tell you how to think or believe. So from the very beginning, it's interesting that some of the earliest protections you find in American history deal with the rights of conscience. And by the way, outside of what we have in history and Constitution and law, I've got to point out that this is a huge thing for God as well. One of the things that proves that this is a God-given right is that this issue of the rights of conscience and conscience itself, in the New Testament alone, you have more than 30 verses addressing conscience. And you have a number of verses that tell you to craft your public policy to protect the rights of conscience. And as a matter of fact, we're told in passages like 1 Corinthians 8 that if you violate the conscience of another, you've sinned against Christ. So it makes it real clear. You don't go around stomping on other people's conscience. You don't answer for their conscience. Paul made the comment, he said, for me, it doesn't bother my conscience to eat meat that's been offered to idols. But there's other people that they can't do that and it bothers their conscience. And he said, you know what? If that wounds their conscience, I'll go the rest of my life and not eat meat offered to idols so that I do not offend the conscience of someone else. Now, it doesn't mean offend someone else. That's a different thing, to offend the conscience, because they believe before God that they can't eat meat offered to idols. And Paul says, we know that idol's nothing, it's just rock or wood. But these other people feel like that there's a real spiritual thing there and that they've contaminated themselves if they eat that. Paul said, it doesn't bother me, but I'm not going to do it if it bothers them. And that's where in 1 Corinthians it says, if you cause a brother to violate their conscience, you have sinned against Christ. So that's always been our policy since the Reformation, since we got back to the Bible, is you protect the rights of conscience. So America's populated by people who were persecuted in Europe because they didn't think what the government told them to think. You had state-established churches, and so whether it was in Great Britain or whether it was in Germany or wherever else, these people didn't think the way the government told them to think. And so William Penn says, well, I think I should go to a different church than what the government tells me. No, you're going to get prison time for that. And that's why William Penn went on trial, actually, in Great Britain was he attended the wrong church. That's a conscience issue. So having said that, you start looking, and when you start looking at civil protection in the United States, and I'm talking early on, for example, Roger Williams, the governing document he penned in 1640 for Rhode Island, Providence area, it protected conscience. You move to the 1649, the Maryland Toleration Act protects conscience. The 1663 Charter for Rhode Island protects conscience. 1664 Charter for Jersey protects conscience. 1665 Charter for Carolina protects conscience. The 1669 Constitutions of Carolina protects conscience. 1676 in West Jersey, and 1701 in Delaware, and 1682 in Pennsylvania. And I mean, it just, they're cranking it out. I mean, this is one of the earliest rights protected in America because it is a God-given right. It's an inalienable right, and government exists to protect those rights. So we were already doing that before the Declaration came along at all. And then as you get into the time of the Founding Fathers, you see the same kind of thing going there. For example, in 1776, when they did the original Constitution of Virginia, it's striking that in that Virginia Constitution, and we're talking George Mason and Jefferson, all these other guys, it said religion can be directed only by reason and conviction, not by force and violence, and therefore all men are equally entitled to the free exercise of religion according to the dictates of conscience. And it's the mutual duty of all to practice Christian forbearance, love, and charity toward each other. That's the Constitution of Virginia. You have the same thing, the Constitution of New Jersey, 1776. You have the same thing, the Constitution of New York, 1777. I mean, these guys, they're really serious about this. And so as you look across those constitutions, the Founding Fathers were huge into that. And it's out of that environment that they create the Constitution and the protections that we've enjoyed for so long.
Wow. So that it's not just there, it's everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Mean,
you have to, as a military chaplain said back in the Spanish-American War, he said to not see this, you have to be blind, so blind that you cannot see the midday sun in a clear sky. I mean, it is so evident that you have to willfully be blind and not to see the protection for conscience. That's the number one protection we gave in America from the very beginning.
So you're just slightly for it then, is what you're saying?
Well, we haven't even got to the constitutional aspect of it yet. That's just the background leading up to the Constitution.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, we got to take a quick break. It's Foundations of Freedom Thursday. Stay with us, folks. We'll be back in a moment on WallBuilders Live.
Thomas Jefferson said, "The constitutions of most of our states and of the United States assert that all power is inherent in the people, that they may exercise it by themselves, that is their right and duty, to be at all times armed, and that they are entitled to freedom of person, freedom of religion, freedom of property, and freedom of press."
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Christians have always believed that the greatest life-changing experience available to any individual is a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, and the testimonies of numerous converts confirm the dramatic changes which often accompany salvation. One such testimony of change comes from founding father Noah Webster, who explained, "I was led by a spontaneous impulse to repentance, prayer, and entire submission and surrender of myself to my Maker and Redeemer. I now began to understand and relish many parts of the Scriptures which before appeared mysterious and unintelligible. In short, my view of the Scriptures, of religion, of the whole Christian scheme of salvation, and of God's moral government are very much changed. The power of God to change a life yielded to Him was just as evident at the time of the Founding Fathers as it still is today."
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Samuel Adams said, "The liberties of our country and the freedom of our civil constitution are worth defending against all hazards, and it is our duty to defend them against all attacks."
We're back on WallBuilders Live. Thanks for staying with us. We've taken a question that has to do with conscientious objection. And David, the case you laid out in the first segment even is from early American history it's replete with it. As you said, you cannot not notice it.
Yeah, you cannot not notice it unless you're the President of the United States and Hobby Lobby comes along. Then you cannot notice it, or Conestoga Wood, or the others, or the nurses in Illinois. You can have their legislators not notice it when they say we don't want to do abortions. That violates our conscience. Well, you will do abortions, and we can't pay for abortifacients, a Hobby Lobby. Well, you can pay for it. So we have this long record of it. And it's not like it was just in American history when we got to the Constitution and didn't protect it, because we did. Because you go through all those state constitutions. Now it's coming time for the federal Constitution, and the federal Constitution comes along and they give the 15 powers to the federal government, just the enumerated powers. But a lot of the states said, well, we know they're only supposed to do 15 things, but we think that if we don't box the federal government in, they're going to do a whole lot more than 15. So let's box them in. Let's go ahead and list a bunch of the inalienable rights that should be protected. And that's where that at the ratification conventions in several states, and you had the ratification convention in North Carolina and Virginia and Massachusetts and others, where they came up with these list of things that they wanted to be included in a Bill of Rights. They said, we want you to include a Bill of Rights. And it's striking that as you look at those proposals for what's included in the Bill of Rights, it had protection for conscience. Several of them. Here's language on several states proposed this exact wording. It says, quote, all men have an equal, natural, and unalienable right to the free exercise of religion according to the dictates of conscience. So that was proposed constitutional language for the Bill of Rights. Now, when the Bill of Rights came out, it did not have the conscience clause, but it did have the free exercise of religion. And it's striking that Thomas Jefferson himself, when that was finished, he said, we've done it. We've protected the rights of conscience in the First Amendment. And then even when he wrote that famous letter to the Danbury Baptists, he said that there's a separation of church and state because that's how we protect conscience. We don't let the government get. So the whole thing about conscience was all the way through the founding era. It was all the way through the Constitution. The guys who did the documents afterwards, and guys like Jefferson who commented afterwards, said, we've done it. First Amendment protects the rights of conscience. Now, because of that, that's why we have the history that we have in this country of things like this. I'm very patriotic. I love America. I think we should teach kids all about America. I love the Pledge of Allegiance. But you know what? I will go to the mat for Jehovah's Witnesses not to be required to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Because in Jehovah's Witnesses' faith, they pledge allegiance to no one but God. They don't pledge allegiance to any civil authority that violates their faith. I'm not about to make them say the Pledge of Allegiance or require them to do so.
So for them, that's a right of conscience. They're conscientious objectors in that case.
And there's a right of conscientious objectors for others as well. If atheists don't want to say the Pledge of Allegiance, they don't have to say the Pledge of Allegiance. You can't force them to do that. But now for atheists to come in and say nobody can say it because I don't like, now that's not conscience at that point. That's just a heckler's veto. But nobody, to this day, nobody who says the Pledge of Allegiance is required to do so. Anyone who objects for any reason can be excluded from that, and that's the way the law is.
How did we switch from, we're going to respect your right not to do it to we're going to give you the right to keep anybody else from doing it?
Well, that's you get courts loaded up with guys who have agendas who are very secular, because you see, all of these rights are based on the fact that you recognize there is a God, that God gives certain rights, and the government exists to protect those rights. If you drop out the first factor, that there is a God, or if you drop out the second factor, that he gives rights instead of government, then the whole purpose of government and the third factor changes. And so those 1, 2, 3 points, we've got a lot of guys who are either secular or they don't think that God gives rights. They think rights come from the Supreme Court or from the Congress or from the president, whoever. And if Congress gives the rights or the court gives the rights, they can regulate the rights. And that's one of the problems with the Supreme Court is look how often they reverse themselves. They declare a right and then declare it to not be a right. And they declare something to be right and then declare something to be wrong. They reverse themselves continually. That's not what you get with inalienable rights. They are fixed. They are transcendent. They cross all times, all generations, all genders, all ethnicities, all races, all languages. They're permanent. But what happens is you get guys on the court who don't believe in points 1 and 2, and therefore point 3 in the American philosophy of government, the purpose of government then changes, and they're not going to protect those things. So whether it be the Amish, they don't have to go to school 12 years, everybody else does. Whether it be the Seventh-day Adventists, their kids don't have to get vaccinated, everybody else does. Whether it be, the pacifists, the Quakers that don't have to fight in war when everybody else can be drafted. All of those things. That's rights of conscience. We've always protected that. So, with the question coming back to what do I think about it? Number one, I think it's a God-given right. Number two, I think it's a biblical right. Number three, I think it's a historical right. Number four, I think it's a constitutional right. And number five, I think it's got to be protected. That is the core of limited government, is keeping them from affecting what you believe and what you think and what you have on the inside. And
so what you're saying is you're kind of on the fence on this one.
Yeah,
you're not sure.
I'm really not sure how I'm going to come down on this because it really is such squishy stuff back in. No, I mean, this is an easy one to answer.
You would list this, I'm assuming, as one of the fundamental rights that we this is way up top in terms of what we need to be fighting for and preserving.
Well, historically, this is the first one we started protecting, and those guys back then who gave us all the thinking that led to our Constitution, they saw this as the issue.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Great question from Will. Appreciate it. We'll be right back. Got to take a quick break. We'll come back with more Foundations of Freedom here on WallBuilders Live.
Abraham Lincoln said, "We the people are the rightful masters of both Congress and the courts, not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the men who pervert the Constitution."
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. The key to a self-governing nation is self-governing people, and the key to personal self-government is to live by the standards in God's Word. If someone cannot control himself by those standards, then our Constitution certainly will be unable to restrain him. Understanding this, John Adams declared, "We have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Greed, ambition, revenge, or seduction would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." John Adams believed that successful government rested not upon our great Constitution, but rather upon moral and religious people.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom
President Calvin Coolidge said, "The more I study the Constitution, the more I realize that no other document devised by the hand of man has brought so much progress and happiness to humanity. To live under the American Constitution is the greatest political privilege that was ever accorded to the human race."
Welcome back to WallBuilders Live. It's Foundations of Freedom Thursday. Our next question is from David King in Massachusetts. He said they were listening to the radio with David Barton on Common Core and the AP exam and wondered if Congress, actually he's got 3 or 4 questions here, David, so I'll just rapid fire you here. Has Congress, he said, done anything about this unlawful, unconstitutional activity that's been illegally forced upon our children?
Well, the House has passed a bill that says that no federal funds can be used on Common Core. Now, the Senate, that's a different issue. Initially, Harry Reid wouldn't let it come up. We'll see if Mitch McConnell let it come up. But third, is the president going to sign something like that? No way, because it's his Department of Education pushing it. So Congress will do what they can, but as long as you've got this president, that's not going to happen. And even if Congress passed it, he would still tell the Department of Education fund it. So probably not anything there is going to happen significant in Congress.
The House tried to do something, but they couldn't get it through the Senate.
That's right.
And so it's not the law of the land for sure. They haven't accomplished anything on it anyway.
Bottom line is Republicans tried to do it. Democrats killed it.
There you go. Okay, second question you ask is, has this gone to the Supreme Court or to state courts?
It won't, and it's only gone to state courts in areas like where Bobby Jindal ordered that it be defunded, and the State Board of Education said over our dead bodies. And so now he's got a lawsuit in that. So it's only in state courts in areas where that there's a contradiction between the officials on whether it's going to be defunded or not. I think the same thing has gone in Oklahoma. I think that court is now settled. But there's nothing likely to go to federal court on this, because if you don't take the federal dollars, you don't have to do Common Core. And the choice is just don't take the federal dollars, but who wants to give up 6 to 16% of the budget for education? Most don't want to do that.
Okay, he closes out his email with, third, do our children legally have to participate in these, or are there other options so our children don't have to partake in these unlawful activities? Thanks so much.
Well, they don't have to participate in the testing. Whether they can get out of what goes in the classroom, no, they don't have to participate in that. Just put them in a different school. If you find Common Core going on, put them in homeschool or charter school or Christian school or parochial school or private school, or put them in something else. So they don't have to participate, but you got to be the proactive one to get them out of there. And then as far as testing, I love to point to New York, because New York is not a conservative state. It's a blue state. And yet up there, 60,000 kids, the parents and their 60,000 kids have said no to the Common Core testing. If they're not going to do high-stakes testing. And so even principals up there are encouraging students and parents to say no. And by the way, that's a deep hit in the pocketbook, because I think, as I recall, it's somewhere between $70 and $105 a kid that the state gets paid on those testings. So when you start pulling 60,000 kids out, now you're getting up toward that $1 million mark. And so, no, you don't have to participate in the testing. You can opt out of that, and that is a good way to start hitting them economically and make them rethink what they're doing.
All right, great questions from David King. Appreciate you sending that in. Folks, if you'd like to send a question in for us to cover on Foundations of Freedom Thursday, send it to radio@wallbuilders.com. We got a quick break. We'll be right back with more from David Barton on the foundations of our freedom.
Thomas Jefferson said, "In questions of power, then let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down for mischief by the chains of the Constitution."
Have you noticed the vacuum of leadership in America? We're looking around for leaders of principle to step up, and too often, no one is there. God is raising up a generation of young leaders with a passion for impacting the world around them. They're crying out for the mentorship and leadership training they need. Patriot Academy was created to meet that need. Patriot Academy graduates now serve in state capitals around America, in the halls of Congress, in business, in the film industry, in the pulpit, in every area of the culture. They're leading effectively and impacting the world around them. Patriot Academy is now expanding across the nation, and now's your chance to experience this life-changing week that trains champions to change the world. Visit patriotacademy.com for dates and locations. Our core program is still for young leaders 16 to 25 years old, but we also now have a citizen track for adults. So visit the website today to learn more. Help us fill the void of leadership in America. Join us in training champions to change the world at patriotacademy.com.
Let the torch of freedom
Calvin Coolidge said, "The more I study the Constitution, the more I realize that no other document devised by the hand of man has brought so much progress and happiness to humanity. To live under the American Constitution is the greatest political privilege that was ever accorded to the human race."
I just love that reading of that quote. I enjoy it every time we get a chance to use it. Welcome back. You've been listening to WallBuilders Live. It's Foundations of Freedom Thursday. We're taking some of your questions today, and this next one comes from David Mullen. He said, and I like the way he writes this, he says, "Can the Supreme Court case on separation of church and state be challenged and overturned? Wasn't Fisher Ames the composer of the First Amendment, and Jefferson had nothing to do with composing the Bill of Rights? Couldn't we challenge the witness of Jefferson as speculation only, hearsay, and that Fisher Ames, its writer and champion, rejects it?" I think that's a great approach, David. That's exactly right. I mean, Jefferson had nothing to do with the First Amendment. Fisher Ames had a totally different perspective, but he's not the one that gets quoted.
And that is something we have done exactly that way. We went into court on an issue where the Founding Fathers had a clear practice of supporting that particular religious expression. And so we pointed out to the court and specifically cited Fisher Ames, said, look, TJ is not the guy. He wasn't even in the country. He said he wasn't there for it. Here's the guy who was. And the court looked at that, and we lost the case 5-4 at the Supreme Court by specifically taking that part and quoting that part. And one of the justices actually wrote a dissenting opinion in which he singled out those arguments, and he quoted Fisher Ames back at us. And the Founding Fathers we specifically quoted, he quoted back at us, and his conclusion was real simple. He said, well, we see the Founding Fathers' practice here, and their precedent was that they supported this and they encouraged it and they participated in it, and Fisher Ames and this and that. And he said that just proves one of two things about the Founding Fathers. It proves either, first of all, that the Founding Fathers were hypocrites because they knew this activity was wrong and they went ahead and did it anyway. He said, or it just proves the Founding Fathers didn't understand the Constitution. So literally, we cited Fisher Ames and other founders in that exact way that David's talking about. And the court, and see, what you find is It doesn't matter what kind of evidence you present. When you have a worldview, you will find a way to get what you want done. You will misquote a founding father so that you can wrap them around you and say, well, you know, Thomas Jefferson said there has to be a separation of church and state, so we can't let this happen. No, read the rest of the letter, dummy. You cited 8 words out of it. It's a 3-paragraph, 1-page long letter, and he says just the opposite when you read everything, but they won't do that. They will find something that justifies what they want to do, and they will wrap, because if they just say, hey, we're being judicial activists, we really don't care what the founding fathers wanted, and we're going to do it, everybody would attack them. But they say, no, we're following what Thomas Jefferson wanted. You know, Fisher Ames and those guys just didn't understand the Constitution, First Amendment. They wrote it. What are you talking about? And so that's why you look at worldview more than you look at even history. History only works for people who want the truth. If they're not after the truth, it doesn't matter what you present. So while David's argument makes perfect sense to someone who's a constitutionalist, it makes no sense for someone who is a living Constitution person. That is, they write it in wax every time they want a new decision.
Man, wow. Well, good questions today. And, folks, I know you've got questions about our foundations, about our freedoms, about where we came from as a nation and how to preserve it. Send those in to us, would you? radio@wallbuilders.com. Maybe it's about an issue today. Maybe it's about a founding father or Supreme Court decision. Send them on, and we'll try to get to them on our Foundations of Freedom Thursday programs. If you'd like more of those, go to our website, wallbuilderslive.com. Thank you for listening today to WallBuilders Live.
Abraham Lincoln said, "We the people are the rightful masters of both Congress and the courts, not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the men who pervert the Constitution."
We stand undivided.